Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Freeman Wilson, and I am honored to serve as the chair of the Criminal and Social Justice Committee for the Conference of Mayors, and I have the distinct privilege of leading this session on a very important topic, a very grave topic. Earlier, we just had an excellent discussion in the plenary on what mayors can do to build inclusive and compassionate cities, and the conference centers the conference intentional action on helping us to do that. In this session, we're going to discuss a key factor in ensuring that not only are our cities inclusive, but that we protect our residents against those who do not value them for particular traits that they possess. Not only that we protect them against, but that we send a message that we do not tolerate the ill treatment of people based on their gender, their sex, their race, their religion, and any other driver of hate crime. For many years, the Conference of Mayors has had a strong policy condemning hate crimes and urging mayors to speak out against them whenever they occur, and to ensure that there is reporting at the local level as well as to the FBI. So today we're going to begin with a briefing on the increase in hate crimes that we're seeing across the country by the Anti-Defamation League and in the person of their counsel, Michael Lieberman, who has been to this meeting before, who has presented at our meeting before, and who has been working hand in hand with the conference on these issues. The ADL has also been a great partner with the Conference of Mayors, and of course that partnership was strengthened with our joint development of a compact to combat hate, extremism, and bigotry, which was signed by 325 mayors shortly after Charlotte. I want to acknowledge, even though Mr. Lieberman will do the presenting, that Jonathan Greenblatt, who is the ADL's National Director and CEO, is present. Mr. Greenblatt, just saw him. Oh, well, I knew he said he had to catch a flight, so he is going to catch a flight. Then we'll hear, after Michael, from Mayor Bill Peduto, who will discuss his city's response to the deadliest act of anti-Semitism to ever occur in our country, the mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in October. And I want to commend all of you and your cities who came together in unity with the folks at the Tree of Life. In the city of Gary, we had a unity celebration at our synagogue, Temple Bethel, and I just want to commend so many mayors and council members who did the same thing. We'll then hear from our colleague, and actually, I think Bloomberg classmate, Mayor Andy Burke, who will discuss the Mayor's Council Against Hate, which he has established in his city. And then our cleanup hitter is our friend, Chief Tom Manger, who is the police chief in Montgomery County, Maryland, and the immediate past president of the Major Cities Chiefs Association, and a close working partner as the mayors and police chiefs convene to work on issues like these together. Before we hear from our speakers, I want to go around the room very quickly and ask all of the mayors present to introduce themselves, and we will start with Mayor Peduto.
Hi, I'm Bill Peduto, the mayor of Pittsburgh.
Mayor Rosas, San Jacinto, California.
Mayor Kim Norton, Rochester, Minnesota.
Aloha, Mayor Kirk Caldwell from Honolulu.
Good morning, Mayor Leon Rockingham, Mayor of the City of North Chicago, Illinois.
John Hamilton, Bloomington, Indiana.
John Deckenberg, Charleston, South Carolina.
Nancy Vaughn, Greensboro, North Carolina.
Stacy Armato, City of West Beach, California.
Tom McGee, Lynn, Massachusetts.
Mark Myers, Greenwood, Indiana.
Denny Doyle, City of Beaverton, Oregon.
Ted Wheeler, Mayor of Portland, Oregon.
Gleam Davis, Mayor of Santa Monica, California.
Robert Storr, mayor of Danville in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Tammy Dana Bastion, Mayor of Rowlett, Texas.
Curtis Dean McCowan, Mayor of the All-America City of DeSoto, Texas.
Carol Dutra-Bernacci, Mayor of Union City, California. Holly Missa-Petter, Mayor of San Leandro, California.
Sean Riley, Mayor of Waukesha, Wisconsin.
Sharon Weston Broom, Mayor of Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Alan Eckberg, mayor of Tukwila, Washington.
Rick Kreisman, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Sylvester Turner, Mayor of Houston.
Mike Ryan, Mayor of Sunrise, Florida.
Michelle J. Gomez, City of Tamarack, Florida.
Ann McInerney-Ogle, Mayor for the City of Vancouver, Washington.
Steve Calloway, Mayor of Hillsborough, Oregon.
Arthur Bidgen, Mayor of Marlborough, Massachusetts.
Yvonne Spicer, Mayor of Framingham, Massachusetts.
Andy Burke, Mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Thank you again. And so before I turn it over to Mr. Lieberman, I want to advise everyone that we are live on C-SPAN, and I want to thank our COPS director who is present today, Mr. Phil Keith, for his support, for his leadership, and for always being a partner to the Conference of Mayors and, of course, the cities that we serve. So, Mr. Lieberman.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning. Still have a few more moments in morning. It's an incredibly important time for this panel. It's an incredibly polarized time in our country. There are many communities in our cities that are feeling isolated, vulnerable, alone. There's much that we can do to buck them up. The U.S. Conference of Mayors has been a leader on this issue for 30 years. I want to give a shout out to Lara Waxman, who's done extraordinary work leading this work. They've been a great partner to the Anti-Defamation League on supporting improved data collection, on training programs, on legislation like the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which passed now almost 10 years ago. I have 5 minutes. I want to make 3 points. First, data drives policy. You cannot address what you cannot measure. The Anti-Defamation League has been doing an audit of anti-Semitic incidents in America since 1979. We have 25 regional offices in many of the cities that are represented here. The 2017 audit documented almost 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents, a 57% increase over 2016. It was the largest single-year increase ever. The best national data comes from the FBI, passed in 1990, the Hate Crime Statistics Act, collecting data from 18,000 police departments around the country. In 2017, the most recent data, there were almost 7,200 hate crimes reported from about 16,000 police departments around the country, a 17% increase over 2016. There was an 18% increase in race-based hate crimes, a 16% increase in crimes against African Americans. African Americans have always been, since 1990, the plurality of all the hate crimes reported to the FBI. A 20% increase in crimes against Asian Pacific Americans, 63% increase in crimes against Native Americans, crimes against Arab Americans doubled in 2017, a 24% increase in crimes against Latinos. Religion-based crimes increased 23%, and crimes against Jews increased 37%. Crimes against Jews have always been between 50 and 80% of the religion-based crimes. You don't have to work for the Anti-Defamation League to be concerned about 2.4% of the population, and yet 50 to 80% of the religion-based crimes against Jews and Jewish institutions. Crimes against Muslims in 2017, according to the FBI, actually decreased slightly, but still the third largest numbers ever since 1990, and crimes based on sexual orientation increased 5%. The vast majority of hate crimes are not committed by organized hate groups or members of hate groups, but some are. In fact, some of the most high-profile cases, we'll hear from Mayor Peduto in a moment, the most deadly hate crime against Jewish Americans in American history. The mayor of Charleston is here. The Mother Emanuel Church in July of 2015, where 9 worshipers were killed by a white supremacist, and the 2 black grandparents killed in a Kroger parking lot in Jeffersontown, Kentucky, outside of Louisville. This is the report that ADL issued just this week. There's a link to it in your app. The U.S. Conference of Mayors app for this conference has a lot of resources that I'll be mentioning. This report came out this week. Every single one of the 50 extremist murders in 2017 were committed by right-wing extremists. That has not been the case in the past. It was the case this year. Third, mayors are problem solvers. That's what you do. That's why you go to work in the morning. That's what gets you up to go to do your work. But we know that we cannot outlaw hate, bigotry, anti-Semitism, racism. No executive order that you are going to be able to promulgate is going to end homophobia, any of these isms. I worked on the federal Matthew Shepard James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act for 13 years, working in coalition with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Chief Manger from the Major City Chiefs, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. But I know, and you know, that the law is a blunt instrument when it comes to addressing hate. It's much better to prevent it in the first place, and this is why we're having this panel at this time. This is a best practices panel. You're going to be hearing from the panelists about ideas. We're supposed to have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of ideas. After the white supremacy rally, street fights, murder in Charlottesville, ADL and the Conference of Mayors delivered a compact, the Mayor's Compact, also in your app, a 10-point plan. It's much, much more than just let's all get along, let's all sing Kumbaya together. It includes using the bully pulpit to speak out against hate, finding anti-bias and bully prevention programs some money to be able to go forward in schools, training programs for police, and supporting community program to celebrate cultural and ethnic diversity, like you'll hear from the mayor of Chattanooga, Mayor Burke, in a few moments about his council. Inclusive and Compassionate Cities is a demonstration of the Mayor's Conference commitment. Mayor Benjamin, Mayor Fisher's involvement ensures that this will be a legacy involvement for the conference, and that's great. Every city should have a hate crime policy. If you go to the Chattanooga website, you will find the hate crime policy of Chattanooga on the website. There are things that you can do next week to demonstrate that your resolve against hate crime, and they're easy and don't require funding. You have a policy, you could create a policy. The International Association of Chiefs of Police has a great model policy. It's in your app. You can just take the parts that you like from that, make it your own. Every city should train its officers to identify, report, and respond to hate crime. Every city should collect and report hate crime data, both to the state repository and to the FBI. In 2017, 92 cities, over 100,000 in population, either told the FBI that they had 0 hate crimes or they did not report at all. That would be a really great figure if it was true. I think there's reason to believe that it's not true. Chief Manger files every year from the Montgomery County Police this report, a Montgomery County report on hate crimes. Visibility and transparency is a best practice, something to be applauded. Finally, you do not have to create these resources on your own. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. As I mentioned, every resource that I mentioned, including some other ones, are in the app. Great resources from the FBI. I wish I could say that we're going to solve this problem after this panel, or maybe even in advance of the 88th winter meeting, but we won't. And therefore, implementation of the Mayor's Compact, thinking about the ideas that are going to be presented on this panel are really important, and thank you for the commitment that you have made to these issues.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lieberman, and I hope that you will check out those resources on the app. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing that report. Mayor Bill, you and your city have been through quite a bit over the last year. Please share your response and how you all are working through this.
Thanks, Mayor. I can remember exactly where I was when I first heard it. I was with a sergeant. My chief of staff was in the back seat, and we were going up the hill to Mercy Hospital to check on a couple of the officers who'd been injured. And on the radio, they said it. And it was described as the deadliest act of anti-Semitism in American history. Asterisk, Pittsburgh. And you never think about that. You know, when you're a mayor and you're thinking about your city, and your city will go down in history for this. And it would never happen at Tree of Life, because Tree of Life is literally Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, where Fred Rogers lived, 2 blocks away. It's where Willie Stargell, We Are Family, lived. It's the most diverse neighborhood in all of Western Pennsylvania. People choose to live in Squirrel Hill because they want to live around people who are different. And they embrace that. It's my neighborhood. I live 7 blocks away. Those words just hit like somebody punching you in the stomach, taking the wind right out of you. Everything that you thought about your city is completely changed forever. And of course, Pittsburgh being the city that it is, the victims themselves were friends. They were family members of friends that you've known for 20 years. You get to go through this process of trying to operate and act rational at a time when the emotions really are taking over, and it becomes difficult. You know, and you hear about the stories of how the first officer arrived, and upon coming out of his vehicle, walking in front of the car and looking in through the glass windows that are tinted at Tree of Life and seeing the shadow behind there of a person holding an assault rifle aimed right at him and throwing up his hand as the bullet went through it. Going back behind the car and realizing only hours later that he was on his way back into the car where he had other weapons and more ammunition in order to be able to go to another synagogue. It's about the officers that were running in, not really sure where he was, and the rabbi who was hiding in a closet. And all of those stories start to add on and add on. And you understand that what you're dealing with is at the highest level of evil. That there's an evil when a life is taken. There's a extra evil when it is, in a whole different level, those that can't help themselves, whether it's 2 brothers who are 54 years old who have special needs, or a 97-year-old grandmother. There's a different level of evil that occurs when it occurs because of the way someone prays, simply because of the way that they pray and what their religion is. And then there's an entirely different level of evil when it occurs at sanctuary, at the place where you are safe. And then you start realizing that you're dealing with a heavier level of evil when hate crimes happen. But let me tell you this, and it was very apparent very early on, that in that darkness of evil, there is light. And you will see that light. I saw it before 12 noon. 10 a.m. I get the call. 10:05 I'm on site. I'm there before members of the SWAT team arrive. We're standing at that outside corner, rain falling on us, cold morning, and by 11 o'clock we have the person and we're taking him to the hospital. I look around the corner around that same time and I see my friend Wazi Muhammad. And Wazi's the executive director of the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh. But it wasn't just Wazi who was standing at that corner. It was the entire board of the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh, because they have their meetings on Saturday mornings, and as soon as they heard, they got in their cars and they went directly to the synagogue. And I said, Wazi, why are you here? And he said, because we need to be here. It was the Monday afterwards, and I was taking police officers to the different schools so that the kids who were in those schools, whether it was the yeshiva or the community day school, would understand that the police were there to protect them, that they didn't have to be afraid because there was a police officer there. And the officers themselves engaging with the kids and sharing their first names and asking how many kids want to be police officers. And as we walk out of the school, a minivan drives by and it stops and it starts backing up, and my sergeant gets out of the car concerned that somebody wants to cause harm. And a young guy, probably 7th or 8th grade, comes running out of the car with a glass vase with flowers in it. And he said, this is for you. And I said, what's this for? And he said, because you're my neighbor and I love you. And I said, hold on a minute. And I walk up to the car and I look in the front seat where his mom's sitting. And the entire front seat is filled with glass vases with flowers that they're handing out to people all around Tree of Life. It happened the next day on Tuesday when the protest came, when President Trump came to visit. And the protest was thousands of people who have marched for many different issues. They've marched against violence against youth by police. They've marched for social justice. And as they passed Zone 4 of Pittsburgh Police Station, they stopped and they clapped and they said thank you. And the police came out and they hugged and they saw each other. And why was that able to happen? Sure, it was in that evil that people wanted to be good, but it was 10 years of building the interfaith dialogue in Pittsburgh, 10 years of Jews and Muslims and Christians working together, 10 years of getting to know each other and then becoming friends. It was a mother who taught her son the greatest lesson of taking him out in that van and being able to pass out those flowers and letting him know that the worst time and the most evil, there's something good you can do and it will make you feel better too. But you're going to be helping that person who is unable to deal with that situation. And it was a continual beat of police and community over years and years of interaction that allowed people to put themselves in those officers' place and to let them know after the most traumatic day of their work that we got your back this time. I stood 2 weeks later as the community gathered. We followed Jewish law. We allowed for the proper time period after the last funeral before gathering as a community. And we gathered at the point of Pittsburgh where the rivers come together. And we stood there along with people like Mrs. Rogers and Franco Harris and all the luminaries within Pittsburgh. And a young minister came up to me and she told me this. She said it was 80 years ago today that Kristallnacht happened. It was 80 years ago today that people burned down synagogues in Czechoslovakia, Germany, and Austria, and the police looked the other way. In Pittsburgh, they ran into the buildings with the bullets flying at them. It was 80 years ago today that Jews were killed and politicians turned their back. And in Pittsburgh today, we stand shoulder to shoulder, Democrat and Republican, to say never again. It was 80 years ago today that community leaders allowed the Holocaust to begin. And in Pittsburgh today, we stand as one to make sure that we follow what we believe to be the right way. We can defeat hate. I loved our expression, stronger than hate, and showing the Steelers symbol with the Star of David. And it said something about not only Pittsburgh, but the response that came from around the world. It was more than we were saying that we were stronger than hate. We were saying that an attack against one is an attack against all.
Thank you, Mayor Bill. Earlier today in another session, you talked about a club that nobody wants to be in. And Mayor Burke is a member of that club, the club where in cities there have been mass shootings. And I just want to commend Mayor Burke, too, on his leadership and his response, and would you please share that with us now?
Well, thank you, Mayor, and thanks to both of y'all. Thanks, Bill, for your incredible leadership. This is a club that many of us, unfortunately, now either are part of or think about being part of. In June of 2015, I was watching TV when one of my heroes, Joe Riley, was on there describing what had happened in Charleston at Mother Emanuel. And I thought to myself, what must he be going through? How bad must that be? Well, about 6 weeks later, I was in a press conference announcing some good economic development news when my chief of staff came up to the podium and gave me a sheet of paper, and on it it said, active shooter at a military facility, officer down. So, ended the press conference, walked out, started trying to assess what had happened, and a shooter who had been radicalized as a terrorist had killed 4 Marines and a sailor in our city. Had been to 2 facilities, had also been to a facility where he had shot a recruiter for our armed forces and had been taken down by one of our officers who had walked into there to take care of the problem. This was a huge incident in our community. We're a patriotic city. We value our connections to the military, and we just had 5 people who were gunned down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So one of the first things I did was took out our whiteboard, gathered everybody around, and started writing down the rules of the road. This is how we're going to respond to this incident. Our police chief, who did an amazing job, we sat down and started going through what are we going to say, and the first thing that we said is we're going to protect every single person. It was a Muslim young man who killed these 5 heroes. And we know that part of what we have to do is keep our Muslim community safe over these next few days. And we also said another rule that we put down was no one will be radicalized as a result of this incident. Not one person will be radicalized as a result of what happened here today. And so this started us down the road of figuring out how we combat violent extremism in our city and around our country. The young man who perpetrated these horrific acts, he grew up in Chattanooga. His father actually works for city government, still works for city government today. And just to show you how interconnected all this is, and I say this almost everywhere, he wasn't radicalized in Chattanooga, but he came back to Chattanooga to commit these acts, which means we're all in this together in a really critical way. So after we had done a lot of work and we had a great response, a lot of articles were written about Chattanooga and our response afterward. We were contacted by the State Department, and Mike Duffin is here with the U.S. State Department Secretary Kerry had started something called the Strong Cities Network. It's all about how you combat violent extremism and try to prevent these acts from occurring. I started going peer-to-peer, talking to other cities. They arranged that not just in the U.S., but all around the world. We had numerous visitors from places from the Balkan areas to the Far East. We've had tons of people and tried to learn what was happening. And this counter-violent extremism work is actually really important. There are people on the edges of our city everywhere. Sometimes they turn to violence in ways that we see every day, and sometimes they turn to violent extremism as a result. We have to reach out to them. Many of you do incredible work at reaching out to these young men and women, and we know it's mostly men because we are worried that they're going to join some kind of group where they perpetrate violence in our city. Well, another thing that they can do is get radicalized and commit some horrific act of terrorism. As part of that, we started talking about an international group of mayors through the Strong Cities Network to combat hate. And I thought to myself, well, why am I talking to a bunch of international mayors about what to do all across the world, and we're not doing this in our city the way we should? So I stood up last year at State of the City and said that we were going to form a council against hate. When you say something like that, it can sound, you can worry it's going to sound a little hokey, council against hate, who's against it? What I found was people were hungering for this. Particularly in our religious community, they see this, they feel it, they're worried about it. They were dying to participate in something like this. We gathered community leaders and we've started working. Our very first piece was to reach out to the Anti-Defamation League. They came in and did a session with us. The newspaper has turned over its editorial page to us where members of the Council Against Hate are writing about it. We're gathering information. Our work is ongoing. And so I just want to say to everybody, first of all, think about getting involved in the Strong Cities Network. I assume Mike is here so that if you feel the need, he can take your name. But second of all, there is a hunger for talking about hate. People see it on their phones. They feel it in their lives. They watch it from our highest leaders in our country. And it is time for all of us to step up and say this, because not one person should be radicalized in your city during the time that you're mayor. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Andy. And earlier you heard about the Montgomery County report that has been published under the leadership of Chief Manger. Would you please share your insight with us now?
Yes, happy to. And it's first let me thank Mayor Burke and Mayor Peduto for your leadership when these things happen and your compassion. It is, as a police chief, it is so helpful in terms of responding to these kinds of awful, tragic incidents when you have, when your boss is doing the right thing and working with you. This truly is what was described up here by these two mayors certainly is a club that you don't want to be a member of. And so let's think about, and these awful incidents, unfortunately, we have more and more mass shootings around this country. You see the statistics for the numbers that we've had since the 80s and how they're increasing exponentially. But the majority of the hate crimes, the vast majority of hate crimes that you will deal with in your city aren't going to get this kind of national coverage. They're going to be vandalisms. They're going to be threatening letters. They're going to be swastikas spray painted on a school bus. They're going to be less likely to get the kind of attention that these kinds of incidents that we just heard about would get. You're going to have most of the hate crimes are either going to be targeted against someone because of their race, because of their religion, You're going to have some that are targeted to people because of their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their gender preference. All of those are folks that are the most typical victims of these hate crimes. And the majority of your hate crimes are going to be vandalism or graffiti. There'll be some physical assaults, some minor assaults that don't result in someone's death, verbal intimidation, written intimidation. These are the kinds of things that you'll deal with every day. So let me give you a couple of recommendations to how to deal with those, because if you ignore those and only pay attention to, and you wait for the big one to happen, and that's when you react, your community, you're going to have a lot of victims that feel like they're not being cared about and frankly living in fear. So every hate crime that occurs, whether it is a misdemeanor, whether it's a graffiti or anything like that, you should work with your police chief. Every hate crime should have a detective assigned to it. Now, that's not as big a workload as you might think. First of all, you probably are going to count your hate crimes hopefully in the dozens, maybe. I've got 1 million population in my jurisdiction. We had about a little over 100 hate crimes last year, but every one of those was assigned to a detective. Even that swastika spray painted on a restroom wall. And in some cases, all that might be required by that detective is to go talk to the victim, go talk to someone, and, do you have any more information? All right, if you hear anything, make sure that here's the number you call, so we can follow up on it. It may just be one visit. Put a press release out on each one, because it gives you the opportunity to give that statement condemning that act. And using that bully pulpit to remind the community we're not going to tolerate this kind of hate. So putting out a press release on the hate crimes as well is an important thing to do. I do recommend have a member of your staff go to the Montgomery County, Maryland website, the Montgomery County, Maryland government website, click on police, and look and click on our hate crimes annual hate crimes report. Have them look at it. I'm not saying it's the best thing in the world, but I will tell you it has gotten tremendous feedback from our community, and there might be something in there that you might find valuable. And putting that information out every year to report to your community about hate crimes and the attention you're paying to them sends the right message. One of the results of assigning a detective to each one of our hate crimes is that we actually were able to determine the perpetrator in about a little over half the cases. And in some cases, just somebody spray painting something on a wall, or leaving a nasty note for somebody, putting something in someone's mailbox, attacking their sexual orientation, things like that. We were able to determine the perpetrator in over half the cases. Here's the interesting point: in 67%, and these are the ones that we found out who did it. 67% of the people that we identified were under 18 years of age. They were under 18 years of age. And so I think that one of the things that really calls on us to do is to use this as we've got to put information together to educate young people about the harms of targeting anyone through a threat, through hate, or ridicule based on their race, religion, ethnicity, appearance, manner of speech, or any trait that is protected by law. The fact of the matter is that, we could have another whole session on dealing with the adolescent mind. A lot of these, the adolescent mind is different. It's different than the white supremacists who have an agenda. I mean, you deal with them differently. Many, maybe even half of our hate crimes are committed by folks whose brain is still developing, and so I think dealing with it through education should be a priority for all of us in terms of preventing it from happening, educating our kids, maybe helping them develop their brains on these kinds of topics. The last thing I wanted to mention, just in closing, is there are sometimes people struggle with, was a particular incident, was it a hate crime or not? we make a mistake if we want to get into a debate publicly on whether something was a hate crime or not. The best way to deal with it is said, we're looking at this, and we're certainly looking at it with the possibility that this may be a hate crime. There's nothing wrong with saying that. And if it turns out it is a hate crime, you're on it. And if it turns out it's not, you don't have to get into a public debate with a victim. Because one of the criteria, by the way, of whether something is a hate crime, one of the criteria is, does the victim feel that they were targeted, because of their, race, religion, ethnicity, or some other characteristic. So I think it's important for us as we respond and react and deal and address every hate crime, and not just the tragic ones that get national attention, but as we deal with all of them that are occurring in our community, which is the majority of them, it sends the right message to the community, and it makes the victims feel like, you know what, they paid attention to it, they care about it, and they're condemning it. And those are the three big things I think that we want to do for our victims of these crimes.
Thank you so much, Chief. At this time, we will accept questions and comments from mayors. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And John Tecklenburg from Charleston, and I stepped out of the room for just a minute. I heard you mention Charleston because, yes, folks, we're a member of this club. And Mayor Peduto, when you were speaking, it brought back such memories for me. Very, very similar circumstances in Charleston, other than our killer intentionally came to start a race war. And rather than just the distinction of faith, he simply murdered 9 people in a house of worship based on the color of their skin, solely on that. And Mayor Andy, you're right. Mayor Riley was the mayor right when it occurred. I was elected 5 months later. It changed my life. It changed the life of our city. And, this past weekend during Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, someone shared this quote with me that a measure of how much you can love your neighbor is determined by a measure of how much forgiveness you can share, how much you can forgive. And by that measure, I'd like to say that Charleston is one of the most lovingest places on this planet. And boy, did we learn the lesson, as Pittsburgh has so poignantly, that love is stronger than hate. So what have we done since that time? I just wanted to share a couple of brief things, if I may. One, even though, and so appropriate to community policing and the COPS program, even though the police department in Charleston had a very good relationship in the community, we doubled down and created a project called the Illumination Project, which has been one of the most intensive community engagements between police and citizens that I think you could imagine. And I'd be glad to share further information about that project with any mayors that are interested. Hate crimes, you speak of hate crimes, and I'm sad to report that the state of South Carolina does not have a hate crime law, so we created one at the municipal level. So now we have a City of Charleston hate crime, so that when those more misdemeanor things happen, Tom, like a swastika being graffiti, or someone hatefully pushing someone because of their sexual orientation or whatever, we're able to add another criminal offense locally through our City of Charleston hate crime. But the third thing I would share with you, it was so ironic that this perpetrator came to Charleston. It was intentional on his part because of our city's history. the city of Charleston was rooted in the institution of slavery. And almost half of the enslaved Africans who came to North America entered this continent at the city of Charleston. And so we took a deep dive at look at ourselves, and for the first time in our city's history, we publicly apologized. The city of Charleston apologized for our role, our direct role in slavery. And it just, I believe, helped send this additional message of forgiveness, that love is stronger than hate. And then lastly, Mayor Bill, as I'm sure you'll find in the years to come, we've commemorated the annual heinous crime that occurred with a community celebration of that forgiveness that occurred, of the love that exists in our city, in our community, and remind ourselves again and again of how important that is, not only to us, but help to share that message with everyone that we possibly can. It's so important. So, and thank you. I wanted to share those thoughts with you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Mayor.
Well, I thank everybody for sharing and for how you have worked with your communities and shared some of this information here on a smaller, different level. And maybe this is just some questions and to get feedback later on. I'm impressed that you were able to get the media to work with you to not radicalize what happened in your city. Unfortunately, some of the hate crimes is not always an image. It's not always a physical violence. It's a verbal violence. And sometimes it's very hard to figure out how to help a victim who knows exactly who was attacked by the verbal hate crime and how to figure it out. So maybe there are some strategies that could be passed around so we can figure out how to help our cities and our victims not be victims. When you're hit with a verbal hate crime, how to handle it, how to empower the victim for not feeling that they've done something wrong just because of the color of their skin, for the religion that they practice, or the sex that they are, or who they choose to love. And then also, I think the idea of being able to teach our children to not give in to the hate. How do we teach the parents? Because usually our kids are learning this from their parents or their grandparents or their adult social network. So what do we do? I would love to know more on how to stop this. I know the ADL is something that's very important and near and dear to my heart as well, to figure out how we can work together. But there are certain things that if I'm in a smaller city and you don't expect anything to happen, my sister city is Parkland right here in Sunrise, but Parkland, as we all know what happened a year ago, in a couple of weeks, so you don't think it's coming so close to home. So maybe there's also a way to, we have active shooter training, but what can we do for exactly active hate training? What can we all do together to get this information out? Because in this day and age, I'm sorry, there should be no hate. There should just be acceptance of everybody's individuality and learn to love from that and be able to move on and accept the differences. So just maybe a naive comment, but I bring it out there.
Yes, thank you.
I would recommend and this will go directly to what you were talking about. Bill Moyers wrote a piece called "Talking Back to Hate Speech," and it's Bill. You go to billmoyers.com. The title was "Talking Back to Hate Speech." Amazing, very, very helpful, the advice that you'll find in that story.
Yes, Mayor. Thank you.
Christine Hunchofsky, I'm the mayor of Parkland. We actually had some hate crimes prior to February 14th in our community. Swastikas written, terrible language written. And our community is very proactive with this stuff. Everybody comes out immediately. We have a very strong interfaith coalition that every Thanksgiving, on the Tuesday evening before Thanksgiving, we have an interfaith service where we celebrate all faiths. And I think as much as talking back when it happens, it's important to fill the space when nothing's happening. And when the Tree of Life shooting happened, we also had another interfaith ceremony in our community to show that when you attack one, you attack all. There is no difference. And we don't just talk about it, we act on it. There was a Rock Shabbat that Friday in our public park. I'm a Catholic, but I went to the Rock Shabbat because I wanted to show that I wouldn't be afraid. And we need to always step up. Our actions speak louder than our words. And when our actions don't mirror our words mean nothing. And it is also just in our day-to-day lives. When we hear people saying things that are wrong, call them out. It can be done nicely, but it needs to be said. We also have an active LGBTQ group that's coming in and will be doing free trainings with our staff on just being a little more aware of how they interact with others. And I keep going back to Mayor Fisher with the compassionate cities. If we take up all the space and we make sure everything we do is done with purpose and done with compassion, we're living what the example that we want to see.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Okay.
So thanks so much. I just wanted to make say two things. Number one is that in response to your comment about the words and how people respond to them, when I decided to make do the Council Against Hate, some of the people on my staff actually pushed me to say against hate crimes. And I purposefully did not use the word crimes in that. It's a Council Against Hate because I thought that certainly hate crimes is a piece of this, but it goes to something deeper. And so I think thinking about this in terms of not just hate crimes, but hate is important to me. The second piece I would just say is we have every 90 days, I'm sure a lot of y'all do the same thing. We have a prayer breakfast. We gather religious leaders from across the city, and they form a great backbone to talk about this. They want to talk about it. But if anybody wants a copy of our work plan, I'm happy to share it. We actually have a work plan for the Council Against Hate. And so if you contact me, I'm more than happy to share that, because if you do something like that, it's easy for it to just be platitudes, and we want to actually work. And so it's hard to figure out exactly what you do to make it real. And we're still struggling to get everything done that we want to get done, but I'm happy to share anything that we've done so far with people who want it.
So I mentioned earlier, you don't want to get into a debate with a victim about, no, it's a hate crime, yes, it's a hate crime. Those are not helpful at all. You also don't want to get into the debate of, well, did it rise to the level of a crime? Was it a freedom of speech issue? That we document, not only do we document hate crimes, we document what we call bias incidents. So even if it doesn't rise to the level of a hate crime, we will make a report. And then if you have, something occurs, a week later in that same area, you might have a suspect or certainly a lead that you can work on because you documented one or two bias incidents that may have led up to a hate crime later on. And it just, again, it's helpful in terms of sending the message to the victims of these incidents that we care about them enough to keep track of them.
Thank you. Michael.
Thanks, Mayor. So we brought 20 copies of this, hard copies of the Murder and Extremism report. You're welcome to come and get them at the end. But the number one policy recommendation that we make in this report, and I'm sorry to say after Tree of Life when we were doing our policy agenda, the number one policy recommendation is speak out. And for civic leaders and mayors to use your bully pulpit, obviously not just in the aftermath of a horrible incident, but finding ways, whether it's every 90 days, regular events, commemorations, unfortunately, to be able to use your bully pulpit to speak out against hate, it's impossible to overstate the importance of that.
Thank you. Our last comment.
Mayor Buckley from the City of Annapolis. Our hate crime in our city, if you're not familiar with it, was an attack on 5 innocent journalists that were gunned down in their newsroom. And free speech is at the foundation of our democracy, and we have to stand up against that. And I have to say to every mayor that's in this room, it can happen in any of your cities. All of us would not expect these things to happen in our city. But we have a president that says it's okay to get even. We have a president that says it's okay to push a guy into a car and rough ride him home. That's not what mayors do. That's why I'm so proud to be a mayor and proud to be in this conference with you all, because that's not the sort of leadership you see in our level. We did a drill a week before our shooting, and I stood in our local Catholic high school and watched the guys break through the back door with blank guns, and we had simulated gunshot wounds, and we watched this whole thing play out in front of our eyes. One of the journalists that was covering that event was killed in the newsroom. A week later, exactly the same thing happened to her. So I'm asking the mayors that are here that have been affected by this to come to our G77 summit. There's 77 cities in this country that have been affected by mass shootings in this century. That doesn't include Columbine, so we had to draw a line somewhere. But we are having a conference on that, and I think if we band together, if we work as a unit, we can make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And so we have heard a series of concrete suggestions, strategies, opportunities for action. And we know more than anything that mayors are about action. Data is important, both the collection and the reporting of data. And even if your state doesn't collect data, this is an opportunity to impress upon them the importance of it. We also know that the development of an ecumenical or interfaith strategy is important in cities. And let me just put my constitutional law hat on. It is not a violation of the First Amendment to work with the leaders of the faith community in your cities. You can't establish a church, but you can certainly work with the church and other communities of faith. And I'm going to tell you, if you're in this business anytime, you're going to see how important that is. We also talk about the fact that local ordinances, some of us can enact local ordinances that will assist in the process. We know that the Strong Cities Network is available to us. And we also understand the importance of prevention. And inherent in that prevention is education for our children, education for adults, and sometimes, every now and then, our children are the best teachers. And so if we go into our schools and provide the information, there's a great possibility that these children will take that home and begin to cause their parents to think. Throughout this discussion, I've heard the words purpose, care, support, compassion, forgiveness, introspection. And at the base of all of those words and sentiments is the word that is the direct opposite of hate, and that's love. So, you know, in mayors, we are so inclined to be concrete, right? We want to see a report. We want to see the study. We want to do these things. But every now and then, I would suggest to you that we serve best when we demonstrate the love and compassion that we have, not just for our cities, because you really can't love a city, but for the citizens that we serve. And so thank you for being here, and let's keep fighting out fighting against, speaking against, working against hate. Thank you.
Good job.
One last thing. Please join me in thanking Laura Waxman, who is the engineer for all of this work.
Nice to meet you, Mayor. Yes. David Hogg called me yesterday, asked whether this group, David, is doing that.
Hi everyone, my name's Mike. I'm the creator of Mox News, and for the last 15 years I have been telling you that as long as I have the support of the community that I serve, Mox News will post videos forever. And that's the truth. As long as I have your support, no one could ever make me stop. Unfortunately, currently, less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% of Mox News viewers ever donate, tip, or contribute anything back. Again, let me make that really clear. Much less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% ever give anything back. And to those of you who have donated to Mox News, I want to thank you so much, because it's because of your generosity that we have been able to bring attention to important videos that millions and millions of eyes would have never seen. And I think that that's an amazing thing that we've been able to make happen together. And I can't thank you enough for helping me make that happen. So it's not too late. If you'd like to see Mox News covering the 2020 presidential election, if you can't imagine the 2020 presidential election without Mox News, please, there's still time. You can make a difference. It's easy to make a contribution, donation, or tip. You can go to moxnews.com, or in the text body of this video, there are clickable links to the Patreon page or to the PayPal page. And again, it should take less than 2 minutes to make a donation, and your donation can make a big difference. So I thank you all. Stay cool. One of these days this war is going to end, and it would be awesome if Mox News could be there to celebrate that day with you.